Sad day. It's time to winterize the boat and start deer hunting. So anyways, what we're going to use, first thing we need to do is change oil. You need to use Mercruiser oil. I typically use synthetic oil in all my cars, but they told me don't use synthetic in this. It wasn't designed for it. But 25W40, it doesn't cost that much. It's like $2 more than a synthetic oil, but use the stuff designed for this because you're running 3,500, 4,000 RPMs all the time. So anyways, we want to grease our wheel bearings, our buddy bearings. We want to grease them. We want to grease our gimbal bearing right there, like 3 squirts. Okay? We want to pull the prop off, put lithium grease around the shaft. Okay? And to change oil, we need to pull the plug so we can drain the oil out. And we got to get down here and uncoil that line there to drain the oil. Make sure you get any water out of the bottom. Dry it out good before you put it up. And then we need to take our oil filter off. And then we start it up and fog it. Once we kill the engine fogging it, then I'm going to take the carburetor off and turn it upside down and to pour all the gas out of it so there's no gas left in it over the winter time. And we're going to drain this hose a little bit right here. The mechanic tells me they don't drain the carburetor. They take vice grips and smash this hose down right here. And I'm worried about what that's going to, because I can't even smash it with my fingers. But that's what he says he does. Put vice grips on and crimp off and then run it out of gas. But it's simpler to take the carburetor off. All you got to do is get a line wrench. Take this fitting loose, back it up with the crescent wrench. There's 4 bolts. Take this electrical connection to the TKS off. And then we take our throttle linkage off right here. And when we get it off, we're going to lubricate it too before we put it back on with some lithium grease. So there's just 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there. And you pull the carburetor off. Turn it upside down, drain all the gas out, and then work your throttle here so your accelerator pump squirts all the gas out of it. And that way you won't have any varnishing and gas evaporating and leave varnish behind. Once you pull the drain plug out, I like to take it off completely because we're going to put a jug here and let this drain overnight. So it takes a 5/8, exact same size as the plug was. And because this is a 4-point, we just take a small crescent wrench. Just like that. Doesn't really need to be that tight. And now we're going to stick a old oil jug right here and let this drain overnight while we pull the oil filter out. When you drain your oil, you really need to let it sit overnight. As you can see, this has been draining for about 30 minutes and it's not even a quart yet. It would help to start it and let it warm up, but I'm going to let it sit overnight. And I will raise the lower unit up and I'll tilt the trailer all the way up as high as it'll go and then back down because the oil pan is not completely level at this point to drain every bit of the oil out. So I'll move it back and forth a little bit, try and get the rest out. But see, I don't know if you can see in there or not, but it's not even a quart yet. So I don't know why it takes so long for it to drain out that hose. There must be a really small orifice somewhere. But anyways, what I wanted to show you, whenever you go to pull your oil filter off, always put you a towel underneath of these 2 little holes right here. Because when you pull that oil filter off, you're going to have a bunch of oil come splashing out and it's going to go down those holes. And if you put you a cup under there, See that hole? That's where your oil is going to drain. Put your cup, lay your rag down there, and I got a little bit of spill there and a little bit of spill there, but other than that, it's easy cleanup if you're ready for it. Otherwise, you got oil all over down in your bilge. It does take a full-size oil filter wrench. I always pour a little bit of oil in the filter and let it soak for a little bit before I put it on. As much as I can put without it spilling to put it on. That way it helps prime the filter and it soaks up in the filter material, the media. And that way when you start it, you're not having a big air bubble and no oil pressure when you initially start it. But put a rag underneath it here. When you do that, when you put this oil filter on filled with oil, so if you do overfill it a little bit and it spills out, you can catch it all. Put that just like there. It'll catch any oil that spills and then there, and it's a real easy cleanup then. And wipe down anything you got. This hose right here is if your fuel pump diaphragm ruptures, the gas will go into the carburetor instead of the oil, and it lets you know. And it's a good idea to wipe that down because it's like a dust magnet. One other piece of maintenance, I don't know if you can see it or if this light's, but right down here is your drive shaft grease fitting right there. You need to, once a year or so, put a couple shots of grease in there. You do have to do this when you got water running so you can crank the engine. Never run your engine without water running or you'll burn the impeller up. But you got to spin this around until you can get your grease fitting on it, or your grease gun on it. Another thing I like to grease right there while we're here, put lithium grease on your steering rod right there. And if your steering wheel is never straight, this right here is what that's how you adjust your steering wheel right there. So as you can see, we're still draining. I don't know, we might have 1.5 quarts in there now. That's why I let it drain overnight. The way I take these buddy bearing protectors off is I use a plastic spoon so as not to cut that rubber. They're sort of hard to get off, but if you take that spoon and put it upside down, you can pull them off real easy. And that little nipple on there, when you put them back on, you want to make sure that nipple's all the air's out of it so it pops up. So you want to fill that till this comes out and quits coming out anymore. I want to show you guys something else. Last night I let it drain all night long, okay? And this morning I cranked the boat all the way up, and I wanted to show you how much oil came out, how much dirty oil came out by just lifting the boat up. So the drain for the oil plug is in the center, and if the boat's tilted down, all the way down or all the way up, you're not getting all the oil out. See, it's still dripping. And if you're not in a hurry, get all that out. Let it drain out. So then periodically crank the boat all the way down, then crank it all the way back. And you'd be surprised. I mean, that's a good cup of oil that came out by cranking it up and down. So you want to put your grease gun there and pop that till it quits coming out to fill it full of grease. I always like it to have a little dimple like that, a little bit of a vacuum pull to it, so when it heats up, that grease is going to expand a little bit and it'll fill that air void up with grease. When you go to push your hose back in, you can push it back in there with your finger, but when you get to this point, you really need to reach down in the bilge and make sure it's not kinked and pull your plug in straight, and never remove your plug this far, because what's happened here is somebody goes to put the plug back in there, and because the hose is right there by the opening, they just jam the cable in there, and then they start spinning, and you can see what's happened to this cable now. But if you pull it in tight, and when you undo it, just let it hang just like this. Don't pull it out like that and then try and jam it back in here, because this is what happens. It goes like this, and now you're going to tighten that down. And somebody trying to help has now boogered that up. I mean, I guess you could buy another one, but if you just reach down in the bilge, grab a hold of the hose and pull it in tight, you don't have any kind of problem then. Okay, the oil is changed, and put the new oil in. Now we're going to start it up. Now, I like to get it up to operating temperature, and then we're going to drain the water out of it and put RV antifreeze in. I like to use a muff that's like this, that has this locking thing. There's no way for that to come off. I've heard horror stories about people putting a muff on, the kind that's just a spring, and they're letting it warm up, and they go in their house and they come back out and the muff had fallen off and they just toasted their engine. So that's the kind I recommend. Of all the fogging oils I've used, this will make it smoke a whole lot more than that stable fogging oil. This is what I highly recommend, is the Evinrude Johnson fogging oil. With a 7/16 close-in wrench, box wrench, you want to remove your breather, your backfire arrestor, I guess is the proper term for it. This is what keeps your engine from blowing up when you get a backfire. Deep well socket will work too. A ratchet wrench is the best thing to use, but if you take one of these box wrenches, you can spin it around if you give it a... And don't forget the little washer on there. And if you look at the back side's got rubber on it, so it needs to go back like that. And if you don't periodically clean these, you need to every year. Other boats got stainless steel, and I use carburetor cleaner on it. This one here is all plastic, and I wouldn't use carburetor cleaner, but I use just to put some Dawn in a spray bottle and spray it, or Simple Green or something, and hose it out and then stick it in the sun to let it dry. Alright, it's going to be noisy, but you're supposed to increase your idle a little bit when you do this. When you do that, you'll see all kinds of smoke coming out. And I kill it with the fogging oil. While the engine is still hot, we want to drain the block, and then we're going to fill it up with antifreeze. This RV, get the cheapest stuff you can, and then we're going to flush the exhaust manifold with it. Make sure you put it below the block and fill it about halfway up, pull it out, pour it out, and this is just water coming out, hot water. Don't burn yourself, as this says it's 160 degrees, so be careful. Okay, take this carburetor off. You need a 5/8 line wrench, and you want to back it up with a small crescent wrench right here. Okay, and your 4 little nuts are 7/16. 2 of them you can get to with a 1/4 inch drive, and 2 of them you're going to have to hand turn with just a wrench, because you can't get to them. And this is 3/8 back here, and that's all you got to do. You're just going to pop this off and take your TKS electrical connection off right there, and then you want to put something small up under here to catch the gas that's fixing to come pouring out of there. So we're just going to cut us a piece out of that milk jug there, and we'll probably take these lines back loose so we can slide it under there and catch all the gas. But you want to break this loose before you loosen those nuts. Just don't take it loose, just get it broke so it can hold the torque as you do that. So remember where your bolts go, put them in order. When you pull your carburetor off, make sure this is good and clean. And if you're not going to put it back immediately, you need to cover it, make sure nothing goes in there. Sometimes your gas continues to leak out a little bit later. I always want to mark this too because it wants to twist on me. Even though we have this carburetor off, look what happens when I turn it. Look at the accelerator pump pumping gas out. I don't know if you can see that or not. See that? That's what I want to do. I want to make sure we work this really good. So we clean that chamber that the accelerator plunger goes up and down right here. We want to make sure all the gas is out of there so it don't varnish. If you don't over torque this gasket and before you put it back on, you spray it with some silicone, spray silicone, it doesn't seem to stick. And so you can do this year after year without having to buy a gasket. Otherwise you tear that up. But here's your idle mixture. I have a video on that. See that needle right there? It comes out there. And this is a really good time It's a perfect time to change your fuel filter. There's a fuel filter in there. Right here, you just unscrew this and there's a fuel filter right there, just like the cars. This is your TKS solenoid. But you want it to air out, let all that gas evaporate from doing all that. But let's put her back on. Okay, all we have to do now is change the lower unit oil. But tomorrow, let it sit overnight and come back and drain these hoses again. And you'll get about another cup of water, because it's like, you know how water sticks to the inside of like a glass when you pour it out? Well, it's going to drain and settle down as it, I don't know. I always get more. I always want to, the next day, you'll get a, I don't know, a couple tablespoons more coming out. So you want to do that before you put it up for the year. So let's go change the lower unit. Then we're done.